Princess Anne finally braced silence on William and Catherine's coronation date. In the gloomy darkness of Buckingham Palace, as the chimes of the clock echoed through the cold stone corridors, Princess Anne sat silently beside a mahogany desk in her private study. An old fountain pen trembled in her hand, and each line of black ink cut into the pristine white paper like a blade. Anne was rewriting history. Not with the flowery words of historians, but in a voice sharp, laced with skepticism and pain. She was recording a secret known only to a select few within the royal family, a secret that would determine the future of the British throne. It was the abdication of her own brother, King Charles III, and the coronation date quietly set for Prince William and Princess Catherine. No press had been invited, no celebration hinted at. Everything was unfolding quietly yet urgently, as if some unseen force was accelerating the wheels of history. And in that silence, Anne realized this was not merely a transfer of the crown. This was a reckoning, a test of honor, and a rare opportunity to regain public trust after so many storms, from Diana's death, to the controversies surrounding Camilla, to Catherine's prolonged absence for undisclosed health reasons. Was King Charles' decision truly the necessary step to rescue the crumbling image of the Windsor monarchy? Or was it merely the belated act of a king who had grown weary under the pressure of public scrutiny and internal division? And in that fateful moment, was Princess Anne the woman who had spent her life behind the scenes preparing for her most vital role, yet the guardian of transition, the keeper of the monarchy's soul in its most defining hour? The story you're about to follow is not just about the crown. It is about legacy, honor, and the haunting silence of the moments that shape royal history. This is the tolling bell that signals the end of one era and the beginning of a new chapter. What do you think? Are William and Catherine ready for the crown? If you believe they will lead the monarchy into a stable future, leave a comment with the number 1. If you remain skeptical and worried about what's to come, comment with 0 so we can explore the discussion together. The clock at Clarence House struck 4 times, sharp and hollow, blending with the steady sound of rain tapping against thick, fogged-up glass. The room was lit by the soft glow of an antique desk lamp, casting a solemn, almost sacred atmosphere. There were no advisors, no aides, no press cameras, just 3 people, the 3 highest-ranking members of the British royal family, facing a moment that could reshape the entire Windsor dynasty. King Charles III sat at the center, silver hair neatly combed, his face deeply lined not just from age, but from years of wrestling between duty and emotion, between title and personal ghosts. Across from him, Princess Anne, his sister, the monarchy's most resilient warrior, the one who had never flinched in the face of any media storm, and Prince William, the heir to the throne, the man in whom the entire future of the monarchy was being invested. Silence stretched through the room, long enough to hear the ticking of the wall clock. Then, in a voice hoarse but piercingly clear, Charles spoke. "It is time. The crown must be given to where it will endure." That sentence sliced through the room like a silent blade, rendering both Anne and William motionless for a moment. No preamble, no justification. Charles went straight to the staggering truth: he would abdicate. Not next week, not in a few months, but imminently. He did not plead for understanding, nor did he seek sympathy. He simply spoke decisively, clearly, as if every word had been pondered over for months. "I do not do this because I am weak. I do it because I am clear-headed. I have fulfilled my roles. But William is the future. My son is the one who can lead this monarchy through the storms ahead." Anne tilted her head slightly, as if to confirm whether she had misheard. In her lifetime, she had seen Charles confront the press, public criticism, even family tensions, but she had never seen him give up. She said nothing. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her familiar fountain pen and a leather-bound notebook, and silently began to write. To Anne, this was not just a meeting. This was a historic moment, a moment she knew would surely be quoted in history books, analyzed by the public, every word, every glance, every silence. She wrote in her journal. His hands didn't tremble. no regret. His gaze was as clear as someone who had just laid down the burden of an entire century. Charles gently closed his eyes. His skin was pale, his thin arm slightly shaking as he raised the teacup to his lips. No one in the room needed to speak aloud about his true condition. The cancer had drained the vitality from the man who had once symbolized the persistence of the monarchy. But what truly exhausted him was not just physical pain. It was the sleepless nights caused by family division. It was watching William and Harry not exchange a single word. It was the feeling that Camilla was becoming increasingly isolated within the very palace she had once conquered at all costs. William still had not spoken. His face was stunned, eyes fixed on his father as if unable to believe what he was hearing. The man with whom he had once clashed, doubted, even found unforgivable, was now calmly handing him the ultimate power with an almost eerie composure. Charles continued, his gaze turning to his son William. I've been wrong about many things, but in this, I am certain my time has ended. You must take the throne, not because you are my son, but because you are the only one who can protect what I once protected. Anne turned to William, her eyes no longer carrying the familiar sternness, but instead an unmistakable glint of worry. She knew, though, if William agreed, this would no longer be a simple ascension. This was a transition soaked in tears and hope, a succession far from easy, amid a public trust that was wavering, and secrets within the palace that had never been resolved. In her journal, Anne wrote Charles did not step back. He stepped into a new role, with solemnity, like the final king of a complex, deeply wounded era. William finally spoke, his voice low and firm. I need time. Charles nodded. You have time, but not my mom. The air in the room turned thick, not with tension, but with the realization that nothing from this point forward would remain the same. From tomorrow or the day after, or next week, every event, every announcement, every ceremony would bear the mark of change. One reign was cracking, another was about to begin. And between these two shores of transition, there were only three people, three generations, three perspectives trying to find a shared voice amid the dense shadows of history. Silence blanketed the entire British royal family like a thick velvet curtain, concealing a shocking secret quietly forming within the walls of Clarence House. After the private meeting between King Charles, Princess Anne, and Prince William, not a single piece of information leaked. No whispers from the courtiers, no statement from any communications advisor, and the press, always keen on detecting unusual movements within the palace, could only sense one thing: the atmosphere was becoming strangely unusual. This silence was not avoidance, but a silence that was designed, controlled, and maintained by the iron discipline of Europe's oldest monarchy. And within that silence, speculation began to take shape. People wondered what was truly said in that room without recording devices, without secretaries. Only three individuals bound by royal blood. And was this silence a sign of the greatest power transition in decades? Or was it a veil for an unprecedented identity crisis within the royal family? Because if a king chooses to abdicate, not because he is forced to, nor because he is too weak to continue ruling, then it is the act of a man who has reached the limits of self-awareness. But that very act also raises uncomfortable questions. Was Charles, in fact, admitting that he had failed in his role as monarch? Were the storms from Diana's death, the rifts between his sons, and the cold stares from the public toward the Camilla ultimately too much for him to bear to continue wearing the crown? Or on the contrary, could this be one of those rare moments when a British monarch shows wisdom beyond power, when he chooses to step back not because he cannot go on, but because he clearly knows who needs to carry forward? And in that very act, Charles forces everyone to reconsider the true legacy he leaves behind, not decrees or speeches, but the courage to place the future of the nation above his own ego. The silence of the royal families, therefore, is not merely discretion. It is an encoded message, an unspoken declaration. And perhaps it is within that silence that Britain is beginning to enter an entirely new era, a post-Charles period that no one yet dares to name. The royal silence stretched on like a taut wire no one dared to cut. No press releases, no leaked rumors through the ever-hungry tabloids. Buckingham Palace, this time, was sealed shut. International media cast their nets everywhere. Royal experts made continuous speculations, but were met only with a chilling, eerie silence. It was this very silence that became the unusual signal, as though the entire power structure was quietly shifting, without the need for drums and trumpets. All of Britain held its breath, waiting for an official confirmation, while the shadows of silence made everything even more somber. Amid that thickened atmosphere, Princess Anne emerged as a central figure, but not through grand declarations, rather through her familiar cold composure. Anne did not speak on live broadcasts, nor appear at press conferences. She acted in silence, just as she had lived her entire life, resilient, devoted, and without the need for the spotlight. And then a quiet truth was revealed by those closest to the royal inner circle Charles had chosen on Buckingham. Not William, not any senior advisor, as the only person permitted to record the day he stepped down from the throne. In red ink, in an old journal, kept inside a private room at Windsor Castle. One short but weighty line was written by Anne's hand, the beginning of a new era. Assigning this sacred task to Anne was no coincidence. In the world of thrones and titles, where every word can be twisted and every action judged, Charles knew that only Anne, the sister who had lived through all the ups and downs of the royal family, possessed the dignity, loyalty, and discretion to bear witness to that historic moment. She was not merely the chronicler, but also the keeper of secrets, a role that had never officially existed in royal protocol, but now carried immense symbolic weight. In observing Charles during his final days as king, Anne noticed what outsiders could not easily see: the weariness buried in his eyes, the subtle sag in his movements, and most of all, the release without sorrow. This was not a man defeated. This was a man who had fought to the end and now chose to step back with grace. Anne also saw William, the nephew she once cradled as a baby, now walking with an unusual calm. No longer the young prince confused in front of cameras, William now stood as a man of responsibility, saying little but commanding trust. It was these very changes that made Anne realize the moment of transition did not lie in ceremonies or official statements, but in this quiet moment, where a king steps back, a future king stands ready, and a sister becomes the silent witness. Anne once said in a rare conversation with a trusted friend, "The crown is not passed through applause, but through silence. That silence carries more weight than any speech." She understood clearly that if the transition happened in the spotlight, people would see it as a performance. But when it happened in silence among those directly involved, that was the true transfer of power and responsibility. Through decades of dedication and an irreplaceable relationship with both Charles and William, Anne had become the unexpected, yet most perfect, bridge. Without needing the title of regent or power behind the throne, Anne remained the one holding the red thread throughout the crown's transformation. A woman standing on the edge of the spotlight, yet controlling all the light within that scene. And when people asked who had witnessed the entire journey from the day Charles was crowned to the moment he stepped down, there was only one name whispered: Anne. Not because she was a princess, but because she was Anne, the keeper of the silent secrets of a dynasty entering a new age. And it was precisely in those quiet moments, when every media lens was focused on a king battling illness, when Princess Catherine stepped away from the spotlight for treatment, when William strained to keep the palace from crumbling under waves of doubt, Princess Anne quietly stepped to the front lines of the transition, not with a scepter or a throne, but with an old journal, a sharp, observant gaze, and a heart that had never once trembled before the storm. Because if anyone could keep everything from descending into chaos, it was her, Anne, the Iron Woman of the royal family, who has never backed down from any storm of public opinion, now bears a responsibility greater than titles and medals to safeguard the sacred transfer of power between a fading king and an heir still learning how to stand on his own. But that also raises a painful question in the hearts of the British people. Is she shouldering too much? Is it truly fair that a 75-year-old woman is the only one holding the key to guide an entire monarchy through its darkest period since the death of Princess Diana? No one can answer that question. But Anne's very silence has become the clearest answer. She doesn't speak to the media. She doesn't post cryptic Instagram photos. Instead, she quietly arranges every detail behind the scenes, from the speechwriter for William to the guest list for a ceremony no one dares to name publicly. Some internal sources even revealed that it was Anne herself who suggested delaying all transition announcement plans, believing that the public's emotional state was not yet strong enough. That wasn't just a wise decision, it was a strategic move, clearly showing her role as the guardian of legacy not only of Charles, but of the entire Windsor dynasty. Anne understands well a monarchy doesn't collapse in a day, but it can be eroded by rash steps and uncontrolled statements. She had witnessed the chaos when Diana died, had heard the cries of the crowd demanding the Queen bow her head. She understands the pain of a public who feels betrayed by those they once trusted. And this time, she swore it would not happen again. So while the press hunts for photos of William in a black suit or secret letters left behind by Charles, Anne quietly maintains perfect control. She is the only one with enough credibility to stand between William and his father's advisors, the only one able to balance loyalty to King Charles with preparation for the future under King William V, a position far too fragile, too sensitive, but only Anne could hold it without shaking the public's trust. But precisely because of this, suspicion began to creep in. A few conservative MPs in Parliament whispered that Anne was wielding too much unofficial power. Royal commentators argued fiercely on live TV. Was she overshadowing William, the legitimate heir? Could a woman who once declined titles for her children truly place the monarchy's interest above her own? The answer, perhaps, is still unclear. But if one looks at how she stands alone in the West Wing hallway of Buckingham Palace, where the evening light falls on the cold stone floor, they will see an unshakable resolve, not because she seeks power, but because she knows that if she doesn't do it, no one else has the strength to take her place. Anne's responsibility does not lie in a title. It lies in absolute clarity amidst a storm of emotions, in her ability to see far ahead while everyone else is still drowning in doubt and crisis. And perhaps because of that, even as the only woman in the royal family who once refused privileges for her children, Anne is now becoming the final hope to ensure the transition happens completely in silence, but with deep reverence. No proclamations, no spectacle, just a slight nod from Princess Anne, and everything moves. And when that day comes, the day William officially steps into his role, history will not only remember a new king, but will also engrave the silent yet monumental role of the woman who paved the way for him with all her loyalty and courage. And while all eyes are turning to Princess Anne as the one coordinating the transition of power, another question simmers quietly within the royal family and the media. Why that date? Why was the coronation of William and Catherine set on a day no one expected? Not Queen Elizabeth's birthday, not the accession day of King George VI, but instead a date associated with Princess Catherine. The answer lies in Anne's wisdom and deep calculation. As the guardian of legacy, she understands better than anyone that symbolism is the only thing that can salvage the monarchy's rapidly crumbling credibility. And among all the symbols the United Kingdom can still cling to, Catherine, the woman who once brought the nation to silent tears when she appeared at that children's hospital, is the final anchor. That day, Catherine did not wear a crown, nor did she step out of a royal carriage. She did not laugh loudly, nor wave to the crowd. But it was her gaze, her gentle hand stroking a child undergoing chemotherapy, and the silent promise that everything will be all right that etched her image into the hearts of millions. It was not an official celebration in royal history, but to the British people, It was the day they truly had a queen in their hearts. Anne knew very well that this choice would make many royal family members frown. She had considered traditionally symbolic dates: the Queen Mother's birthday, the day Elizabeth first set foot in Kenya on that fateful tour in 1952. All of them carried historical weight, but lacked one thing: real emotion. And Anne, in all her toughness, understood that this era required more than hollow rituals. It needed a figure ordinary enough for people to trust, yet noble enough to admire. Catherine was exactly that figure. And so, the coronation date was set on that very afternoon, during the time frame from 3:00 p.m. to 9:00 p.m., when the London sunset poured over the dome of Westminster Abbey, a scene both sacred and cinematic. It was no coincidence that Anne chose this moment. 3:00 p.m. was when global television could broadcast live to both the Americas and Asia. 9:00 p.m. was the moment the crown would touch Catherine's brow. As the clock bells echoed across the capital, a moment Anne hoped would go down in history as a symbol of royal rebirth. Not everyone in the royal family supported this decision. Some old advisors whispered that placing such a monumental milestone of the monarchy on the shoulders of such a relatable moment was too risky. They feared it would disrupt the sanctity of tradition. But Anne was not swayed. She understood that tradition held no value if no one believed in it anymore. And if forced to choose between a rigid ceremonial day and one that made the public's hearts beat faster, Anne would always choose the latter. She also knew, deep in William's heart, that day held more than symbolic meaning. It was the day a man who had once watched his mother crumble under the pressure of the system would now officially rise to change it, not with power, but with trust, with the irreplaceable support of a wife who had walked through illness, controversy, and still held fast to her compassionate heart. Anne had given them the opportunity to turn that day into a living declaration. The royal family may have lost Diana, but they would not lose Catherine. And the public, after so many years of doubts, seemed to be waiting for something like this. They were weary of power games, scandals, and tears shed in silence, only to be torn apart into headlines by the media. They needed a reason to believe, and Anne understood that better than anyone within the palace. The coronation was not just a ceremony to place crowns on two people's heads. It was the final effort to restore a symbol that Britain once took pride in, a symbol worn down by time, tainted by scandal, but now being cleansed by simplicity and compassion. And as the twilight illuminated Catherine's serene smile, perhaps even Anne told herself she had made the right choice. But then another question began to creep into public discourse and into her own heart: can a symbol truly save a regime? Or had Anne just placed the entire future of the monarchy in one fragile moment called public faith? And for the woman who once took up the sword in place of her ailing brother to preserve the dignity of the royal family, this time she was wagering on something even more elusive than power: the emotions of millions of hearts. And precisely because she was placing everything on the emotions of millions, Anne began a silent but meticulously detailed plan. While the press focused only on evening gowns, crowns, and prestigious guest lists, Princess Anne quietly withdrew backstage, working through many nights with senior staff at Westminster Abbey. No grand declarations, no cameras allowed, but behind those closed doors was a campaign full of symbolism. Anne was not just preparing for a power transfer ceremony, but for a historic moment, a moment to redefine the meaning of the British throne in the 21st century. She personally reviewed every draft of the ceremonial scripts, choosing the oath words to be solemn, yet not too detached from the public. In fact, it was Anne herself who proposed changing the coronation's timing, a small but meaningful detail, so that the live broadcast could reach the hearts of as many audience segments as possible. She understood this was not just a ceremony for the nobility. It had to be the coronation of a new era, where the royal family no longer stood above the people, but alongside them. And then a question was whispered through the ancient stone corridors of the palace. Was the date chosen by Anne powerful enough to inspire the public? Or in the end, was it all just a flashy ceremonial formality, a lavish performance to maintain the illusion of permanence? Anne did not answer. She believed in her silence, in every carefully calculated step on the cold stone floor of Westminster Abbey, where she had once knelt before her mother, and now prepared to pass the crown to a new generation. But was Britain truly ready? That was the only thing Anne could not control, and it was also the final gamble in which she placed her full trust. All that remained in the hall after Anne finished speaking was an eerie silence. But then, her gaze turned to William. No calling of his name, no gesture, just a silence that conveyed a message clearer than any words. In that moment, he was no longer a nephew before his aunt. William stood up, as if he understood exactly what he needed to do. One step forward, he left his seat and walked directly toward King Charles III, who still sat quietly in the shadows at the end of the hall. The light fell upon the king's face, illuminating every trace of fatigue and gauntness after months of battling illness. Charles looked up at his eldest son, a gaze layered with emotions that only those who had lived a life within the palace walls could truly comprehend. No one said a word. Then William stopped. He did not kneel, nor bow in the traditional manner. He simply nodded, a gentle nod, but one that carried the weight of a decision that would change the future of the British monarchy. That nod was not merely an agreement with a father running out of strength. It was a promise, a commitment, a silent declaration that he was ready. Ready for a role that his mother, Princess Diana, had been swept into her whole life. Ready for the crown that had crushed the spirits of many women before Catherine, and ready for an era where every step would be scrutinized to the breath. William was not claiming the throne. He was accepting it as a duty he could not refuse. Like a soldier nodding before a battle he was bound to fight. The composure in every movement, the reverence in his eyes toward his father all said one thing: William was no longer the boy walking behind his mother's coffin, shedding silent tears. He was a man, carrying both the scars of childhood and the resilience forged through years of waiting. In that moment, Anne, standing outside the silent dialogue between father and son, gently tilted her head, as if nodding to her own choice. She had waited years for this moment, and now she had seen it. No one noticed Catherine sitting in the row behind, but Anne did. Her sharp eyes followed every smallest movement of the woman about to become the future queen. No tears, no smiles, only calm composure. Catherine did not step forward, did not run to her husband, did not seize this political moment to assert her role. She sat there as she always had for more than a decade, quietly, yet firmly. And it was precisely that silence that impressed Anne the most. Long ago, Catherine no longer needed declarations to affirm her place. She did not compete, did not respond to criticism, did not react to gossip from inside or outside the royal family. She simply acted. The visits to the people in freezing weather, the times she quietly took her children to school while the media chased her every step, and the months spent caring for her husband during a health crisis without a single complaint. In Anne's eyes, that spirit's silent endurance, unshowy compassion was the true strength of a queen. Anne understood well that a crown is not made of gold and jewels. It is forged from pain, sacrifice, and responsibility. And when looking toward Catherine, she realized that this woman had long worn an invisible crown and wore it with more dignity than anyone Anne had ever witnessed. There was one thing Anne had never said, not even to Charles or William: if one day the throne called Catherine's name, she would not oppose it, because in Anne's eyes, Catherine was the only one who could turn the title of queen from a symbol into action. When William returned, his eyes passed over Catherine. No words were exchanged, but that gaze carried an entire universe of understanding. They didn't need to say anything to each other. In the royal world, where everything could be distorted by the media and ceremony, silence became the purest form of communication. Anne quietly observed the two of them, her heart filled with a vague feeling perhaps. At last, a true change had begun, because for the first time in many years, she saw in William a maturity far beyond status. He was no longer the man wearing his father's shoes while still struggling to find his own steps. He was walking that path now with a strange combination of the quiet pain of a betrayed mother and the steely resolve of a father once turned away by the entire nation. William was not perfect, but it was precisely the cracks in his soul that made him real. And that is what the public needs. As for Catherine, the woman once doubted, once called not good enough to marry into Britain's royal family, she is now compelling a thousand-year-old institution to rethink what it means to be a queen, not because of noble lineage, not because of power, but because of her steadfastness through storms while preserving her gentleness, because of a heart that did not lose itself in the whirlwind of fame. Catherine does not speak, yet the whole nation is hearing her voice in every action, every gesture, every silence. And it is precisely that very William, Catherine pair, that is posing a quiet yet persistent question echoing through every corner of the palace. Can they truly change what has rotted from within? Is the renewal they bring strong enough to revive the faith of millions in the British monarchy, an institution eroded by scandal, illness, and partings? Or will the crown prove too heavy a burden? Will the weight of expectation, of tradition, of centuries of ritual crush the very spirit of reform they carry? Perhaps even Anne has no answer to that. But she knows, at the very least this time, the next generation is not stepping onto the throne out of reluctance or calculation. They rise with preparation, with love, with compassion, and above all, with pain transformed into responsibility. All of it a glance, a silence has sparked a fragile hope that perhaps, this time, the crown will no longer symbolize loneliness or the slow death of the soul, but will become a symbol of rebirth. But will that truly happen? Or will history once again repeat a tragic cycle? The question remains. And the answer, but perhaps, only time can tell. That day, the London sky was strikingly clear, as if even the air itself was holding its breath in anticipation of something monumental. Gentle rays of sunlight streamed through the old, stained-glass windows of Buckingham Palace, illuminating every detail of the invitation card stamped with the royal seal. News spread like wildfire. The official coronation date of King William and Queen Catherine had been announced. A moment history had awaited too long, a milestone to end all debates over legitimacy, succession, and faith in the future of the British monarchy. After months of uncertainty with King Charles's illness and the declining public confidence in Queen Camilla, a new chapter is now being opened. And in that moment, Princess Anne, the woman who once took up the sword in place of her ailing brother, once again quietly stands in the background, not needing the spotlight, yet always a silent pillar of the throne's endurance. In a private ceremonies, with no media cameras in sight, Anne personally handed Catherine an extraordinarily precious item, the emerald brooch once belonging to Queen Elizabeth II. It was not merely a rare vintage jewel, but a symbol of belonging, a wordless token that speaks louder than any formal declaration. By giving it, Anne was silently proclaiming, Catherine is not just the wife of the heir, but the rightful bearer of the Windsor lineage. With a calm but profound gaze, Anne softly said just one sentence to Catherine, "It is yours now." No further words were needed, for all the emotions had been placed within that brooch expectation, the passing of responsibility, the trust a woman who once bore the honor of the crown now places in a new generation. And then, as the official announcements echoed from the Westminster clock tower, as millions poured into the grand streets to celebrate, in a quiet corner behind the scenes of the royal play, Anne silently stepped back. No need for applause. No new title. Anne withdrew the way she has lived her entire life, silently, steadfastly, never demanding recognition. She knew her role was complete. She had not only safeguarded the throne from opportunists, but delicately placed it into the hands of those worthy in character and compassion to lead the kingdom forward. This is no longer merely a ceremonial handover. This is a test not only for the British royal family, but for the times we live in. William and Catherine are no longer just symbols, they are the embodiment of hope, and the desire for reform, a chance to start anew after a series of scandals, betrayals, and crises of honor. Their rise is seen as the beginning of a public trust resurrection, as a monarchy once criticized for being outdated now stakes its future on a model blending tradition and modernity. But is their presence enough to quell the waves of doubt creeping through every corner of media and public opinion? Can Catherine's elegance and calm, and William's firmness, withstand a world where social media can bring down an entire dynasty with a single hashtag? That question hangs in the air like a reminder even when inheriting the crown. William and Catherine must prove they are worthy to keep it. And if they fail, then all that Anne silently preserved the unnamed battles, the personal sacrifices for collective honor. The moment she placed that ancient brooch in Catherine's hand may all become meaningless in the eyes of the world. A monarchy may be born of blood and lineage, but it can only endure through trust. The question now is, can William and Catherine uphold that trust in an age that is unforgiving, relentless, and demands truth at every turn? All eyes are on them. And with that emerald brooch on her chest, Catherine has no way back. She has officially become part of the legacy, and from this moment forward, every step she takes will be scrutinized, compared, and judged endlessly. And behind the curtain, perhaps Anne, who has fulfilled her historic mission, now stands silently in the shadows, quietly watching. No need for applause, no need for a crown, for she knows her moment has passed. And if the monarchy can move forward, that is the greatest reward she could ever receive in her lifetime. And so, while the eyes of the world remain fixed on the monumental changes within the British royal family, we come to realize that the most significant decisions are not always announced with blaring trumpets or sensational headlines. They come from quiet footsteps, from a silent nod within the cathedral, from the hand of a woman who wears no crown but bears the full weight of preserving the monarchy. The story of King Charles's abdication and Princess Anne's role in the upcoming coronation is not merely about politics or ceremony. It is a symbol of responsibility, of accepting personal sacrifice for a greater future. Now, as William and Catherine prepare to step into a new chapter of history, they carry the hopes of an entire nation longing for kindness, dedication, and a more humble, relatable image of royalty than ever before. This is not just succession, it is an opportunity for rebirth. What do you think is Anne truly the most important figure in this entire transition? Leave a comment, type 1 if you agree, or 0 if you believe her role is being exaggerated. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel and to continue uncovering the untold secrets of the British royal family. The crown is not a reward, but a burden. And in Anne's silence, it has been passed on with trust and hope. Open, 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 open.